14 noble-born Omegas had been invited to the choosing feast, the ancient Volkov tradition where the Alpha King selected a bride from among the finest women in the kingdom. They sat at the high table draped in silk and jewels, each one younger, lovelier, and more politically advantageous than the last. I was the 15th. I sat at a small table near the servants' door, behind a stone pillar, where I could see the high table, but the high table did not have to see me. I was not supposed to be here at all. My name had been submitted as a candidate by the village council of Belmere, as a formality, a gesture of respect to the crown, never expected to result in an actual invitation. I was Evangeline Moreau, 36 years old, a widowed baker with flour perpetually under my fingernails, and a 15-year-old daughter who was at this moment probably burning something in the bakery I had left in her care. I was not young. I was not noble. I was not beautiful in the way that the 14 silk-draped women at the high table were beautiful. The polished, porcelain, untouched by real life kind of beautiful that came from never having kneaded dough at 3 a.m. or carried a child on one hip while stirring soup with the other hand. The Dowager Tsarina Katya Volkov had arranged my seating personally. I knew this because the steward who escorted me to the back table had looked mortified. "I am sorry, madam," he whispered. "The Dowager was very specific about your placement. She said—" He stopped. "She said what?" I prompted. "She said the baker should sit where bakers belong, near the kitchen." I should have been humiliated. Perhaps I was, underneath the layers of practicality that 36 years of living had built. But I had buried a husband, raised a daughter alone, kept a business alive through 2 winters that nearly destroyed our village, and survived the kind of exhaustion that makes humiliation feel like a luxury I could not afford. So I sat at my little table behind the pillar, accepted the wine that was notably cheaper than what the high table was drinking, and prepared to endure an evening of being invisible before returning home to my real life. The 14 candidates were presented one by one, each rising to curtsy before Alpha King Bastian Volkov, while the court applauded politely. Lady Ophelia Strand, 19, daughter of a duke, fluent in 4 languages. Lady Margot de Vries, 21, niece of the Western governor, trained in diplomacy. Lady Saskia Lindgren, 22, heiress to the northern shipping fortune. Each name was a pedigree. Each woman was a portfolio of political advantages wrapped in youth and beauty. Each curtsy was perfect, and the king watched each one with the polite, slightly exhausted expression of a man reviewing applications for a position he had not advertised. My name was not called. I had not expected it to be. The 15th candidate, the widowed baker from nowhere, the dowager's little joke about what happened when village councils were allowed to submit nominations. I sat behind my pillar and drank my inferior wine and thought about whether Celeste had remembered to start the sourdough cultures for tomorrow's bread. Then something happened that I would replay in my memory for the rest of my life. The king stood. The court fell silent, expecting him to announce his interest in one of the 14 glittering candidates. Instead, he spoke to the steward. There were 15 names on the candidate list. Only 14 have been presented. Where is the 15th? The steward went pale. The dowager shifted in her seat. A murmur rippled through the hall as people counted the women at the high table and realized someone was missing. "Your Majesty," the steward began, "the 15th candidate is—" "Where?" the king repeated. The steward pointed helplessly toward my pillar. "She was seated in the back, Your Majesty, by the dowager's arrangement." Every head in the hall turned toward me. I sat alone at my small table with my cheap wine and my flour-dusted dress that I had tried so hard to make presentable, and I watched the Alpha King's expression transform from confusion to understanding to a cold, focused fury that was not directed at me. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. Then he did something that would be talked about in this kingdom for the next 100 years. He walked to the high table, gripped the back of his ornate chair, the one carved with wolves, the one that represented 3 centuries of Volkov power, and he lifted it, carried it across the hall, past 14 stunned candidates, past his horrified mother, past 300 gaping nobles. He set his chair beside my small table, behind the pillar, near the servants' door, and he sat down. The hall was so quiet, I could hear candle wax dripping. The king looked at me. at the flower under my fingernails, at the dress that was clean but clearly homemade, at the face of a 36-year-old woman who had not expected to be seen tonight, let alone chosen. He smiled. "I hear the bread in Bellemere is extraordinary," he said. "I have been told the baker is even more so. May I join you for dinner?" I stared at him. Then I did the only thing that made sense, because nothing else about this evening did. I pushed my cheap wine toward him. "The wine is terrible," I warned. He took it, sipped it, and grimaced. "It is," he agreed. But the company just improved considerably. They asked the Omega to sit below the family. 14 perfect candidates at the high table. 1 widowed baker behind a pillar. The Alpha King carried his chair across the hall and chose the woman his mother had tried to hide. Chapter 1. Here is what the king knew that I did not. He had already met me. 6 months before the choosing feast, a man had started coming to my bakery in Bellemere every Saturday morning. He was tall, dark-eyed, and dressed like a merchant, with calloused hands and a quiet intensity that I found appealing despite my firm conviction that I was finished with romance. He said his name was Sebastian, and that he worked in trade. He always ordered the same thing, a loaf of sourdough, a pain au chocolat, and coffee, and he always stayed longer than a bread purchase required. We talked. Not flirtatiously. I was a 36-year-old widow, not a blushing girl, but the way 2 adults talk when they enjoy each other's minds. About the failing wheat harvest, and what it meant for bread prices. About the novel I was reading, which he had also read, and which we disagreed about passionately for 40 minutes, while my daughter Celeste watched from behind the counter with barely suppressed delight. About Celeste, whom he charmed effortlessly by asking her opinion on pastry technique, with the seriousness of someone who genuinely wanted to know. About my late husband, Jean-Pierre, who I mentioned without tears for the first time in 3 years, because Sebastian asked about him with a gentleness that made remembering feel safe instead of sharp. 6 months, 24 Saturdays, 24 sourdough loaves, 24 pains au chocolat, and hours of conversation that became the part of my week I looked forward to most, though I would not have admitted it under interrogation. Then the invitation to the choosing feast arrived, and I laughed at its absurdity, and my daughter said, "Mama, you should go. What is the worst that could happen?" The worst, as it turned out, was being seated behind a pillar, and served bad wine while the king carried his chair across a hall to sit with me. Because the king was Sebastian. The Saturday bread customer with calloused hands and opinions about novels was Alpha King Bastian Volkov. And he had spent 6 months visiting my bakery in disguise, because someone on his council had included Bellemere's village nomination in a briefing, and he had wanted to see for himself whether the widowed baker was worth meeting. I did not know any of this at the choosing feast. I discovered it 3 days later. But sitting at that small table with the most powerful man in the kingdom, sharing terrible wine, and trying to understand why he had abandoned 14 beautiful noble women to eat with me, I felt something I had not felt since Jean-Pierre. Seen. Not looked at. 14 women at the high table were being looked at. Seen. In the way that only matters when you have spent years being invisible. The king saw the flower under my fingernails and smiled. He saw the homemade dress and stayed. He saw a 36-year-old widow who had been placed behind a pillar as a joke and treated her like the only person in the room who mattered. 24 Saturdays. 24 loaves of sourdough. I fell for a man named Sebastian who turned out to be a king. He fell for a baker who turned out to be the only real thing he had found in a palace full of performance. Chapter 2. The choosing feast ended without the king selecting a bride, which scandalized the court and enraged the Dowager Tsarina. I returned to Bellemere the next morning, convinced the evening had been a strange, beautiful anomaly that would have no sequel. I was wrong. 3 days later, a royal carriage arrived outside my bakery, and Oscar Lindqvist, the king's personal secretary, delivered a letter. Inside, in handwriting I recognized from the scribbled notes Sebastian used to leave about my sourdough technique, were 3 lines. "I owe you an explanation. I owe you better wine. Will you allow me to provide both? Bastian." Celeste read the letter over my shoulder and screamed so loudly that the sourdough cultures trembled. "I told you," she said, vibrating with 15-year-old vindication. "I told you Sebastian was too interested in bread to just be interested in bread. No man asks that many questions about hydration ratios unless he is in love." I stared at my daughter. He was asking about hydration ratios because he was curious. He was asking about hydration ratios because he wanted to keep you talking, Mama. There is a difference. When did you get this smart? I have always been this smart. You just do not listen because you are busy being sad and making bread. The words stung because they were true. I had been busy being sad and making bread for 3 years. Grief and flour had become my entire identity. Wake up, bake, sell, clean, sleep, repeat. I had told myself it was enough. That I had already had my great love, and asking for more was greedy. That at 36 with a teenage daughter and a bakery that barely broke even, I was past the age of being chosen. Celeste saw through all of it with the merciless clarity of adolescence. You are scared, she said, gentler now. I know, Papa died, and you decided you were done. But Mama, you are 36, not 76. Papa would want you to live, not just exist. And a king just sent you a letter asking to explain why he has been buying your bread in disguise for 6 months. At least hear him out. So I wrote back. 1 word. Yes. He arrived the next Saturday at his usual time, but this time without the merchant disguise. The carriage was unmarked, and he came with only 1 guard, but he wore clothes that were unmistakably finer than Sebastian the merchant could have afforded. And when he walked into my bakery, the regular customers who had shared counter space with him for months stared in bewildered recognition. He sat at his usual table. I brought his usual order. And then, over sourdough and coffee, the Alpha King told me the truth. My council compiled a list of potential brides, he said. Your name was included because your village submitted it. The file described you as a 36-year-old widowed baker with a 15-year-old daughter. My mother took 1 look and tried to remove your name. She said you were too old, too common, and he hesitated, too real for royal life. That made me curious. Because everyone my mother approves of is unbearable. So I came to see for myself. I came back because you argued with me about wheat futures for 40 minutes, and did not once ask what I did for a living. You just treated me like a person buying bread. And I had not been treated like a person in years. He came disguised because his mother tried to eliminate me from the list for being too old, too common, and too real. He kept coming because I argued about wheat futures and treated him like a man, not a crown. Chapter 3. I should have been angry about the deception. I was, briefly. You lied to me for 6 months, I said. I withheld information, he corrected carefully. I never lied about who I was. I just did not mention the king part. That is a significant part. It is, he agreed, and I am sorry. But if I had walked in as the king, you would have treated me differently. The conversations we had, the arguments about bread and books and politics, those were real. The most real conversations I've had in years. I was afraid of losing that. So you understand why I am cautious, I said. Because a man who hides his identity for 6 months, however good his reasons, is a man who is comfortable with secrets. And I have a daughter. I do not have the luxury of being swept up in a romance that might not be genuine. He nodded. What would it take to prove I am genuine? I thought about it. Time, I said. Keep coming on Saturdays. Not as the king, as Bastian. Buy your bread, drink your coffee, talk to me and Celeste like a normal person. Do that. For 3 months while I figure out whether I can trust this. And do not send royal carriages or gifts or grand gestures. I am a baker. I am impressed by consistency, not spectacle. He smiled, the same warm, slightly crooked smile that Sebastian used to give me when I corrected his bread opinions. 3 months of Saturdays. No carriages. No gifts. Just bread and conversation. I can do that. He kept his word. For 3 months every Saturday, Bastian arrived at my bakery in simple clothes, ordered his usual, and spent hours talking with me and Celeste. He brought nothing except himself. He helped Celeste with her mathematics, which she struggled with, approaching the subject with a patience that made her actually enjoy it for the first time. He listened when I talked about Jean-Pierre without trying to compete with a dead man's memory. He told me about his own losses, a father who died when he was young, a mother who loved power more than her son, an upbringing that taught him that people wanted his crown, not his company. Celeste adored him with the complicated devotion of a teenager who had lost her father and was cautiously allowing another man to matter. She tested him relentlessly. Sharp questions, deliberate provocations, the emotional obstacle course that adolescents construct to determine whether adults are safe. Bastian passed every test. Not by being perfect, but by being honest. When Celeste asked if he would hurt her mother, he said, "I hope not. But I am human, and humans sometimes fail. What I can promise is that I will always try, and if I fail, I will own it." "No one has ever been that honest with me," Celeste told me later. "Every other adult just says they will never hurt anyone. He is the first one who admitted he might, and promised to fix it if he does." "He sounds like your father," I said. She smiled. "I know. That is why I trust him. 3 months of Saturdays. No crown, no carriages, no spectacle. Just a man showing up with consistency and honesty, winning over a widow through patience, and a teenager through the radical act of telling the truth." Chapter 4. While Bastian was earning my trust through Saturday bread runs, his mother was waging a quiet war. Dowager Tsarina Katya Volkov had not become the most powerful woman in the kingdom by accepting defeat gracefully. When Bastian refused to choose a bride from the choosing feast, she began a campaign to make me unacceptable through 1,000 small maneuvers. She leaked my age to the court gossip networks as if it were a scandal. She commissioned a portrait painter to create a deliberately unflattering rendering of me that circulated among the nobility. She invited the 14 original candidates to extended stays at the palace, parading them before her son at every opportunity. I learned about this not from Bastian, who was either unaware or choosing to handle it privately, but from Celeste, who had developed a network of information sources among the bakery's customers that would have impressed a spy master. "Mama," she said one afternoon, drying dishes with the aggressive energy of an angry teenager, "the Dowager told Lady Strand's mother that you are a peasant with dirt under your nails who would embarrass the Volkov name." Celeste looked at me. "I want to fight her." "You are 15, I said. "You are not fighting the Dowager Tsarina." "I could take her," Celeste insisted. "She is 70. I have youth and rage on my side. I did not fight the Dowager. I did not need to." Because on the 13th Saturday, Bastian arrived at my bakery with a different energy. He was vibrating with something. Anger, I realized, tightly controlled. He sat at his table, accepted his coffee, and said, "My mother tried to arrange a surprise engagement between me and Lady Margot de Vries last night. She announced it at dinner without my knowledge or consent. I had to publicly contradict my own mother in front of 60 guests. The fallout has been spectacular. I set down the bread I was slicing. "What did you say to her?" "I told her that I had already chosen," he said, "that I was courting a woman whom my mother considered unacceptable, and that I did not care. I told her that if she arranged one more interference, one more sabotage, one more whisper campaign against the woman I love, I would remove her from the court permanently." "You said you love me," I observed, "in front of 60 people. "In front of 60 people and my mother's best china," which she threw at my head. "Afterward." He paused. "I love you, Evangeline. I have loved you since the 3rd Saturday when you told me my opinion on rye flour was uninformed and arrogant, and then spent 20 minutes educating me with such passion that I forgot I was a king and just wanted to be a student in your bakery forever." His mother threw china at his head. He told 60 nobles he loved a baker. And I stood in my shop holding a bread knife, realizing that being chosen at 36 felt different from being chosen at 20. It felt earned. It felt real. Chapter 5. I did not say it back that Saturday, not because I did not feel it, but because I needed to say it for the right reasons. I loved Bastian. I had known it for weeks, but saying it in the wake of his dramatic confrontation with his mother felt reactive, like I was being swept along by his momentum rather than standing on my own ground. So I told him, "I need 1 more week." He looked startled. Not because he doubted me, I could see in his face that he did not, but because he had clearly prepared for either a yes or a no, and received neither. "1 more week for what?" he asked. "To make sure I am choosing you because I want to, not because you just defended me and my emotions are compromised. I am a 36-year-old woman with a child. I do not have the luxury of making romantic decisions in the heat of the moment. I need to make them in the cold light of Tuesday morning, when there are no grand gestures, just the reality of what this life would look like." He respected that in a way that told me everything I needed to know. He did not push, did not protest, did not look wounded. He simply nodded and said, "Tuesday morning. I will be here. He was. Not Saturday, Tuesday. 6 in the morning, when the bakery was cold and the ovens were just warming, and the work was at its hardest and least glamorous. He arrived in simple clothes with flour on his hands, because he had been practicing bread at the palace, badly, as a surprise. He looked at me in my stained apron with dough in my hair and shadows under my eyes from the 3 o'clock start, and he said, "This is what it looks like, is it not? The real version." "Yes," I said. "This is what it looks like every day. Early mornings, hard work, a teenager who will challenge you constantly, bread that sometimes fails, a woman who is still grieving her first husband and may always carry that grief alongside whatever we build. This is not the feast or the Saturday visits. This is Tuesday." He stepped behind the counter, picked up an apron, and tied it around his waist. "Then teach me how to make bread," he said, "because Tuesday is my favorite day now." And I said it. Not dramatically, not tearfully, not with music swelling in the background. Standing in my bakery at 6 in the morning, both of us covered in flour, with the ovens humming and the first light coming through the windows. "I love you, Bastian. On Saturday and on Tuesday, and on every day in between. I love you because you kept showing up, because you learned my daughter's math and my bread's hydration ratios, and my heart's conditions for trust. I love you because you are the first person since Jean-Pierre who has made ordinary mornings feel like they matter." He kissed me. It tasted like flour and coffee, and the beginning of something I had spent 3 years convinced I would never have again. And outside, Celeste pressed her face against the window she was supposed to be cleaning, and pumped her fist in silent victory. I told him I loved him on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., covered in flour, in the unglamorous reality of my actual life. Because love that survives Tuesday is love that lasts. Chapter 6. The Dowager Tsarina requested a private meeting. I expected venom. What I got was more complicated. Katya Volkov was 70 years old, sharp as broken glass, and had been running the Volkov court for longer than I had been alive. She received me in her private chambers with tea that was significantly better than the wine she had served me at the choosing feast. "I wanted you to understand something," she said without preamble. "I do not hate you. I have nothing against bakers or widows or omegas from small villages. What I have is a kingdom that runs on alliances, and alliances are forged through strategic marriages. My son marrying you gains us nothing politically. No territory, no trade advantages, no military alliance. Just," she waved her hand, "bread." I sipped my tea. "Your Majesty," I said. "With respect, your son spent 6 months visiting my bakery, because the strategic marriages you arranged made him so miserable that he was looking for a reason to feel human. The 14 women at the choosing feast were portfolios, not people. He does not need another alliance. He needs someone who sees him as Bastian, not as a political asset. I am that person. And if the kingdom cannot survive a queen who makes bread, the kingdom has larger problems than my bloodline." She stared at me for a long moment. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect? Someone who would be intimidated. I am 36. I have buried a husband, raised a daughter alone, and run a business. I am past the age of being intimidated by powerful women. I respect you, Your Majesty, but I will not be diminished by you." Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth. Katya Volkov did not do warmth, but a grudging recalibration. "My son is 34, she said. "He has been lonely since he took the throne. I have watched him retreat further each year, becoming more crown than man. And then he started going to Bellemere every Saturday and coming back different. Lighter, more present. More like the boy I raised before politics consumed him." She set down her teacup. "I still believe a strategic marriage would serve the kingdom better. But I also believe my son deserves to be happy. And he is happy with you in a way I have never seen before. So I will stop fighting this. Not because you convinced me. Because he did. By becoming someone worth watching again." "Thank you, Your Majesty," I said. She waved her hand again. "Do not thank me. Just make him bread." Apparently, that is all it takes. The Dowager did not soften because I was charming. She softened because her son came alive again after years of disappearing. Sometimes a mother's love wins over a queen's strategy. Chapter 7. We married on a Saturday because every important thing in our relationship had happened on a Saturday. The ceremony was held not in the Grand Cathedral, but in the Bellemere Village Square, surrounded by the community that had raised me and Celeste, with the bakery visible behind the altar, because Bastian insisted. "This is where I found you," he said. "This is where we start." The court was horrified by the venue. The dowager attended in silence, which for her was the equivalent of enthusiastic support. Commander Tova Lindqvist, Bastian's most loyal officer, provided security with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting years for her king to make a decision that was not politically calculated. Celeste stood beside me as my maid of honor. She wore the blue dress her father had bought her the year before he died, the one she had been saving for an occasion important enough to deserve it. When I saw her in it, I nearly could not continue. She looked so much like Jean-Pierre, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same way of holding her chin up when she was determined not to cry. She took my hand. "Papa would be happy," she said. "He always said you deserved someone who saw you the way he did." "Bastian sees you that way, Mama." That was it. I cried. The baker who had survived everything without crying cried in front of the entire village because her 15-year-old daughter had given her permission to be happy again. Bastian's vows were not what I expected from a king. He did not speak of duty or kingdom or legacy. "Evangeline," he said, "I spent years sitting on a throne surrounded by people who wanted my crown. Then I walked into a bakery in Bellemere and found a woman who wanted me to have better opinions about rye flour. You argued with me, challenged me, fed me bread that made me feel human again, and raised a daughter who is smarter than both of us combined. I do not promise you a palace, though you will have one. I promise you Saturdays. Every Saturday for the rest of my life, I will be the man at your counter, buying bread, drinking coffee, and being grateful that you let me stay." My vows were shorter. "Bastian," I said, "I was finished with love. I had used my share, or so I thought. Then you sat at my counter for 24 Saturdays and reminded me that love does not have a quota. It has a beginning, and sometimes the beginning comes at 36, in a bakery, with flour on your hands, and a daughter watching from behind the counter. I choose you, not the king, the man who showed up on Tuesday morning to learn how to knead dough. That man. I choose him every day." The village cheered. Celeste threw flour instead of rice, a tradition she invented on the spot, and that Bastian declared the new official Volkov wedding custom. The dowager watched from her seat with an expression that, if you squinted, almost looked like approval. And I married the man I had fallen in love with over bread, becoming a queen who would never stop being a baker, because the two were never as different as anyone thought. We married on a Saturday in a village square with a bakery behind the altar. Celeste threw flour. The dowager almost smiled, and a 36-year-old widow became queen without ever stopping being exactly who she was. Chapter 8. Moving to the palace was an adjustment that I navigated the way I navigated everything, practically imperfectly, and with Celeste providing running commentary. The girl who had once operated a bakery counter now operated palace hallways with the same confidence, charming the staff, befriending the guards, and establishing herself as an unignorable presence in a court that had expected the baker's daughter to be quiet and decorative. She was neither. I kept the bakery open. Not as a business, I did not need the income anymore, but as a community kitchen that served Bellemere's families, a training center for young bakers, and a place that kept me grounded in who I was. Every Saturday, Bastian and I still went there. We baked together in the early morning, argued about technique, served customers, and remembered who we had been before the crown complicated everything. It was our ritual, our anchor, our proof that love built on ordinary mornings could survive extraordinary circumstances. The Dowager Tsarina, true to her word, stopped fighting our marriage. She did not become warm. That was not in her nature. But she became something more valuable. Honest. She told me when my policies were naive and when they were sound. She taught me court dynamics with the ruthless efficiency of a woman who had mastered them decades ago. She watched Celeste with an interest that grew, over time, into something resembling fondness, particularly after Celeste beat her at chess 3 times in a row, and the Dowager declared her the first worthy opponent she had had in years. One evening, a year into our marriage, I found Bastian in the palace kitchen at 2 in the morning, attempting to bake bread. He had flour in his hair, dough on the ceiling, I genuinely did not know how, and an expression of concentrated determination that made him look exactly like Celeste when she refused to admit a recipe had gone wrong. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Making you bread," he said. "You make me bread every Saturday. I wanted to make you bread on a Tuesday. Because you said love that survives Tuesday is love that lasts. And I want ours to last." The bread was terrible. Dense, lopsided, slightly burnt on one side and raw on the other. He presented it to me like it was a crown jewel. I ate every bite. It was the most delicious, terrible bread I had ever tasted, because it was baked at 2 in the morning by a king who remembered that Tuesdays mattered. He baked terrible bread at 2 in the morning because I said love that survives Tuesday is love that lasts. The bread was awful. The gesture was everything. Epilogue 4 years later. Celeste was 19 and studying economics at the University of Kravik, having decided that if her mother was going to be queen, someone in the family should understand how kingdoms actually worked financially. She visited every Saturday for bread and arguments, and she had developed a relationship with the Dowager Serena that could only be described as terrifyingly productive. The two of them were collaborating on a trade reform proposal that made the economic advisors nervous, because it was better than anything they had produced in years. "She is going to run this kingdom one day," the Dowager told me once, with an expression that was unmistakably proud. Not as queen, as the power behind whoever is foolish enough to sit on the throne. Our son was born 2 years after the wedding. We named him Pierre, after Jean-Pierre, because Bastian said, "Your first husband made you who you are. Without him, there is no Celeste, no bakery, no woman I fell in love with. His name belongs in our family." The court found this unconventional. I found it perfect. Pierre had Bastian's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and Celeste's absolute refusal to sleep when there was anything interesting happening. He was, at 2 years old, already a menace in the kitchen, and the Dowager's unapologetic favorite grandchild. One Saturday morning, while Bastian and I baked in the Bellemere bakery as we always did, a young woman came in. She was perhaps 25, plainly dressed, with the nervous energy of someone working up courage. She ordered coffee, sat at the counter, and finally spoke. "Are you really the queen?" "I am," I said, kneading dough. "And a baker." "You can be both?" she asked, and the question held so much more than its surface meaning. She was asking whether a woman could be both ordinary and extraordinary, whether the world she had been shown, where queens were born, not made, was the only world available. "Yes," I said. "You can be both. You can be anything you want." The girl smiled. "I want to be a baker," she said. "Mine is the best school in the region," I told her. "Applications open next month." That evening, Bastian found me in the palace kitchen making bread for no reason except that I wanted to. My hands needed the dough. My mind needed the rhythm. Some things about me would never change, and the man I married understood that without needing to be told. He sat at the kitchen table, the same way he used to sit at my bakery counter, and watched me work. "Do you remember the choosing feast?" he asked. "I remember being served terrible wine behind a pillar," I said. "I remember carrying my chair across that hall," he said, and thinking that the woman sitting alone at the worst table in the room was the most interesting person I had ever seen. "Not the most beautiful, though you are beautiful. Not the most elegant, though you are elegant. The most interesting, because you looked at 14 silk-draped noble women, then at your own homemade dress, and you did not flinch. You just sat there drinking bad wine with the composure of someone who had survived worse things than a seating arrangement. And I thought, that is the woman I want beside me. Not because she needs me, because she does not. Because she chose her own life and built it with her own hands. And if she chose me, it would mean something. Because she does not choose out of desperation. She chooses out of strength." I set down the dough and looked at him. "You are getting very good at speeches." "I have a talented speechwriter," he said. "She works in the bakery on Saturdays." I laughed, and he pulled me close with flour-dusted hands, and we stood in the kitchen where we had always been most ourselves. Not king and queen, but Bastian and Evangeline, the man who bought bread, and the woman who made it. and somewhere in the world, at a small table behind a pillar, a seat remained empty, where a 36-year-old baker had once sat alone, with cheap wine. But she was not there anymore. She was here, in a kitchen, in a palace, in a life she had built with her own hands, and shared with a man who had crossed a hall to sit beside her. Not because she needed saving, because she was worth choosing. They asked the Omega to sit below the family. 14 perfect candidates at the high table. 1 widowed baker behind a pillar. The Alpha King moved his chair beside her. 4 years later, they still baked bread together every Saturday morning. Because love that starts on ordinary days, in ordinary places, with flour under your fingernails and truth on your tongue, that is the love that lasts. On Saturday, on Tuesday, on every day in between,